Good evening, and on behalf of Beit Emmanuel Mancom Committee, I'd like to extend a very generous and warm Beit Emmanuel welcome to everybody who's here tonight to the 2022 Franz Auerbach Lecture, with a specific welcome to members of the Auerbach family. Some are sitting with us tonight, and some are on Zoom from far afield as Belgium, Germany, the UK, New Zealand, US, and others in other parts of South Africa. And a very special thank you to that small group of people who made tonight possible, with mentions to, obviously, to Margaret, to Merle, the Rabbi, Paul, Russell, and a very big thank you to Robin, who's directing us all from the sidelines. The evening is being recorded, so you'll see that there's some rules about where you need to stand when you ask questions. And to those of you on Zoom, a very welcome to you as well, that we're going to ask you to ask your questions in the chat room so that we are able then to forward them to the speakers. Franz Auerbach, as you all know, was born in Germany and came to South Africa in 1937. Education has always been central to his teaching profession, but also central to him was his Jewish identity. And I think the combination of the two is what allowed him to call himself a Jewish humanist. And it was that motor that propelled him into seeing the importance of education and values as a way of improving people's lives and promoting justice and peace. And I tell you all of this, not just by way of introducing the annual lecture series named after him, but as an inspiration to all of us so that we should remember where our roots are and draw on these experiences of our own in a way that we can contribute to making a society better. And I think he's an exemplary example of that. Our everyday actions should be propelled by the notion of lest we forget, and Auerbach never did forget and always continue to give. Tonight, the honor of introducing our guest speaker falls to our chair, Paul Davis. Mine is just to welcome you all, acknowledge the presence of Tali Nates, who will be our 2023 guest speaker for the 2023 Auerbach lecture. Just as an aside, Tali and I are very old friends, have known each other for many years, but have only seen each other twice, and the second time was tonight. It's a conundrum that you can try and work out. And then I guarantee you a very stimulating hour followed by cake, because it would not be a Beit Emmanuel event if we didn't start with food and we didn't end with food. So with that, I call Margaret to come up to the podium. She's going to read something from her father's works. Thanks, Margaret.
Good evening, friends. On behalf of the Auerbach family, many of whom are joining us this evening on Zoom, I would once again like to thank Beit Emmanuel Progressive Synagogue for instituting this annual lecture in celebration of Franz's life. In particular, thanks to Rabbi Saar, Professor Williams, and the Beit Emmanuel Management Committee for organizing and facilitating the evening's program. I would particularly like to thank Judge Albie Sachs for honoring us with the lecture this evening. Both my parents, Noreen and Franz, really admired you, and your contribution to humanity and justice in this country is legendary. In looking for a piece from Franz's writing to read, I considered the link between personal ethics, religious morality, and the human values and rights enshrined in and protected by our unique and treasured constitution. Franz was an eternal optimist, believing in the good of humanity. He wrote a letter to the Sunday Independent, published on the 1st of April 2001, entitled, "Help Our Youth Build a Common Identity," in which he suggested that pupils should recite a pledge expressing our commonly held values each week. In 2003, the Ubuntu Pledge developed by Franz and others in the National Religious Leaders Forum, NRLF, an interfaith body on which Franz served, was published in 7 of the official languages and widely distributed to religious bodies, NGOs, and the general public. The main headings of this pledge are: I shall try my best to be good and do good, be considerate and kind, care for my sisters and brothers within the human family, respect other people's rights to their beliefs and cultures, care for and improve our common environment, promote peace, harmony, and non-violence, promote the welfare of South Africa as a patriotic citizen, and I quote under this heading, I shall do my best to reduce and remedy the social problems threatening our freedom, which include racism, poverty, oppression, corruption, greed, violence, and disregard for human life. France took pride in the search for what is common to all religions, and I think the Ubuntu Pledge was a culmination of this search, a way of working together with other faiths to bring unity to diversity. However, it must be said that France was uncomfortable with any form of nationalism, following his experiences as a refugee from Nazi Germany. Whether in Germany, South Africa, Rwanda, the Ukraine, the USA, Afghanistan, Russia, or Israel, there is always the danger, as we have all seen, of power corrupting. Franz wrote in the introduction to his book, World on Fire, a short history of the Nazi Holocaust on page 2. What is surprising is that so many people accepted these teachings about racial superiority so readily. Yet there are many examples in history of how the masses can easily be persuaded to hate other people, especially when they are told every day that these wicked other people are responsible for all our troubles. Once such teachings are widely accepted and approved by those in government, the barrier of conscience is breached, and the killings are no longer seen as the murder of fellow human beings. Yet perhaps this is too glib, he writes. One should surely assume that all human beings have some human feelings, even in times of war, and that the still small voice of conscience should restrain us from descending to the levels of cruelty and carefully organized mass killings which took place in Nazi-occupied Europe. Despite the huge challenges that the world is facing, corruption and greed, poverty, war, and climate change, France believed, and so do I, that the still small voice exists even in the direst and most hopeless of situations. We must take heed of this little voice. It is our greatest hope, and in its stillness and smallness, it is contagious, and it has the power to change everything. So I'd now like to call on Rabbi Sa'ar to read the Kaddish for us. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Margaret. In direct continuation to your words about the generation and the Holocaust, the generation that witnessed the Holocaust and us who witnessed the atrocities of our times, the Kaddish pray, speak about glorifying, exalting the name of God, as if all that he has created in his word is perfect. And when we are feeling the missing someone that we miss, someone that we yearn for, then we are expressing it via this prayer, that the word is the way God wanted it to be. The word is the way God wanted it to be. To the dear soul of Franz Auerbach, of Noreen Auerbach, of Ronald, all other members of the Auerbach family, and all our friends and all the comrades that gave their lives so we could be here free and together. Please, if you can rise, we'll try the Kaddish together. יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, בעלמא דעברה חירותי וימליך מלכותי, בחי יחון וביום יחון, וחיי דכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב, ואמרו אמן. יהא שמי רבה מבורך לעולם לעלמי עלמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל, שמי דקודשה בריחו, לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, דאמירן בעלמה, ואמרו אמן. יהא שלמה הרבה מן שמיא וחם עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום ומרומה, ויעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו אמן. Thank you. Please be seated.
It is my great honor and privilege to be able to introduce our two conversationalists this evening, who will together combine to structure the Auerbach happening entitled Tensions Between Religious Expectations and the Spirit of the Constitution. Our Constitution and the Constitutional Court have played and continue to play a seminal and crucial role in our developing country. Both have kept us safe and have led us through what could have been a dangerous and destructive time, and have resolutely protected our fledgling democracy. Justice Albie Sachs has been intimately and selflessly involved in our struggle for a long time. On turning 6 during World War II, he received a card from his father expressing the wish that he would grow up to be a soldier and to fight liberation. Fight for liberation, not fight liberation. He took heed. His career in human rights activism started at the age of 17, when as a second-year law student at the University of Cape Town, he took part in the Defense of the Unjust Laws campaign. 3 years later, he attended the Congress of the People of Kliptown, where the Freedom Charter was adopted. He started practice as an advocate at the Cape Bar at the age of 21. The bulk of his work involved defending people charged with racist statutes and repressive security laws. Many faced a death sentence. He himself was raided by the security police, subjected to banning orders, restricting his movements, and eventually placing him in solitary confinement without trial for 2 prolonged spells of detention. In 1966, he went into exile. After spending 11 years studying and teaching law in England, he worked for a further 11 years in Mozambique as a law professor and a legal researcher. In 1988, he was blown up by a bomb placed in his car in Maputo by South African security agents, losing an arm and the sight of an eye. During the 1980s, working closely with Oliver Tambo, he helped draft the organization's code of conduct, as well as its statutes. After recovering from the bomb, he devoted himself full-time to the preparations for a new democratic constitution for South Africa. In 1990, he returned home, and as a member of the Constitutional Committee and the National Executive of the ANC, took an active part in the negotiations which led to South Africa becoming a constitutional democracy. After the first democratic election in 1994, he was appointed by President Nelson Mandela to serve on the newly established Constitutional Court. In addition to his work in the court, and this is what really attracts me to Albie, is that he traveled to many countries, sharing South Africa's experience in healing divided societies. He also has been engaged in the sphere of art, architecture, and played a very active role in the development of the Constitutional Court building and its art collection on the site of the old Fort Prison in Johannesburg. Albie is a kind, gentle, soft-spoken, yet determined soul, a truly great humanist and a great South African. Merle Williams, his co-conversationalist, is a professor emerita of English at the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, and currently research associate of the African Center for the Study of the United States. Merle's principal research interests range from relations between literature and philosophy to trauma theory, romantic poetry, 19th century and modernistic fiction, and American writing. She is a careful and gifted speaker. She has been closely associated with Beit Emmanuel for the last 25 years and served on virtually all our committees as the chair, as a guardian, and on ManCom. And she delivers regular presentations at Limud and other organizations. So it's with great expectation and perhaps a hushed breath that we now look forward to this unique Auerbach encounter. Tensions between religious experience and the spirit of the Constitution. Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Paul. And I must say I have a sense of enormous pleasure and of privilege being in conversation with Judge Albie Sachs for the second time this year. Towards the end of May, we met at the Constitutional Court to discuss issues concerning ethics, justice, and the law in connection with the festival of Shavuot, which of course marks the giving of the Torah to the people of Israel. We had some fascinating exchanges in the library at the Constitutional Court and also in front of the magnificent carved wooden doors, all of which was imaginatively filmed by our friend Robin Arenstam, who is also playing a key part in the video recording today. So many thanks to Robin, who is equally a member of the Beit Emmanuel congregation. This evening, we're going to take up some of the themes that we were touching on at the Constitutional Court, but with a new emphasis and a new direction. As Paul has said, we're going to be considering the relationship between religion and the Constitution, but always bearing in mind the context of the Auerbach lecture. And again, I would really like to pay heartfelt tribute to the human rights legacy of Franz Auerbach, who was an extraordinary activist, an educator, a scholar, an open-minded Jew, and perhaps most of all, a thoroughgoing, caring human being. So against that background, Albie and I are going to move through a series of topics that are closely interconnected. By way of introducing our subject, I'm going to ask Albie to talk to us a bit about the South African Constitution, bearing in mind that he served on the first bench of Constitutional Court judges nominated by President Nelson Mandela, who had special responsibility for drafting that constitution. From there, we're going to move to considering some judgments that Albie gave in cases where the Constitution came into contact or even into tension with the aspirations, expectations, and views of religious individuals or religious groups. And after that, we're going to try to tease out some higher order reflections on the relationship between religion and law in our South African democracy. So let me now hand over to the speaker you've all been so eagerly waiting to hear, to Albie. And Albie, my first prompt is, please, would you talk to us a little bit about the drafting of the South African Constitution, and especially about an emphasis that you gave to our discussion this evening. You were particularly keen that we should use the words, not the provisions of the Constitution, but the spirit of the Constitution. So could you address those topics for us now, please?
First thing, hello to the Auerbach family. When I came back from exile, it was 24 years later. The people who'd been active when I left were scattered, or all coming back in prison, jail, exile. There was a whole new generation of personalities, names that I didn't know. And one of the names that stood up was Auerbach. There was a guy called Auerbach who was at school with me, so it made the name resonate a little bit. But his name kept popping up all over the place. And I couldn't slot him in easily. I think that was part of his personality. He was a sage, he was a thinker, but he wasn't just a thinker. He was a doer, an activist. But he wasn't just an activist. He had I wouldn't call it an aura, but there was something about him. People liked him. People smiled when they spoke about him.
Absolutely.
And I say people, I mean people from very different backgrounds. And that's rare, unfortunately, very rare in South Africa. People know your particular range, you speak about the people there, and you're not all that close and intimate and connect with others. Something about Franz Auerbach reached out. And it was particularly important then, because we were trying to develop this very idea of South Africanness that didn't just belong to one group, to one section of the community, not associated with one religion or one language or one historical antecedent. And there was this Franz popping up in different cities, doing different things, and being at ease with people, and people being very much at ease with him. So it's a particular pleasure for me. I won't say it's a privilege. I hate the word privilege. I've been finding out privilege all my life, and I've heard it used about 5 times in relation to me this evening. It's a particular joy to be giving a talk on a subject that's been quite deeply meaningful for me. Because here am I sitting in a shul, and I'm secular. Not just a little bit secular, not just very secular, deeply, profoundly secular. And it was very tough for an 11, 12-year-old boy to be profoundly secular. I was at Sachs school, junior school. Half the boys there were Jewish, half were Christian. I'm a Jew. Solly Sachs, my mother. Ray Ginsberg, Solly Sachs, my dad. Rachel Ray Ginsberg, my mother. Every Pesach, we would go to Auntie Rosie and Uncle Eli for the Passover, and then Rosh Hashanah, we would go to them as well, and the whole family would collect. And I'm very happy to identify myself as a Jew. I am a Jew. I'm still a Jew. That's part of me. But my parents had rebelled against religion and took a stand. And it was something important for them to take a stand. I heard years and years afterwards, when my mom and dad got married, they were bullied and cajoled into not going to shul, but a chuppah in somebody's garden. And they go there and the guests arrive. And just as the proceedings are started, Solly grabs Ray and pulls her away and says, enough of this nonsense. I just mention that to show that the stand they took against identifying with religion was a very strong one. And that was the context in which I grew up. And now, and they were also people of conscience, deep conscience about the world, about revolution, about transformation, about change, about existence. So it was that combination of, it was more than humanism. It was an active, engaging humanism. My dad, General Secretary of the Garment Workers Union. My mother would say, tidy up, Uncle Moses is coming. And Uncle Moses wasn't Moses Cohn or Moses Kantorowicz, it's Moses Kotani, the General Secretary of the Communist Party, working for a black man with enormous respect and admiration for him. And I and my little brother had to tidy up because the boss is coming. So that's the context. And then strange things are happening during the struggle. I'm at a meeting on the Grand Parade. I'm 17. I'm about to join the Defiance Campaign. And an African man, Johnson Guavela was his name. He worked for Sam Khan, the the attorney who taught me so much about law, that to this day I owe him a huge debt. And he was what was called a big communist. And he's speaking in the Grand Parade and he's saying, and one day, just as the Lord opened the Red Sea for the Israelites to pass through, we will get our freedom. And I go up to him and I say, Comrade Johnson, I'm surprised that you're quoting from the Bible and the Lord. And he says to me, Comrade Albie, there's some things that politics can reach, and there's some things that politics can't reach. That's a shock for me. The world's much simpler if you can have the secular vision, end of story. But here's this person now who is a self-proclaimed communist, an African man amongst the most exploited, and that was very real important to him. I go forward a little bit. Oliver Tambo. December 1956 was going to be a very important month for him. He was going to get married to Adelaide. He was going to be ordained as an Anglican minister. He would say Providence had other ideas. The South African state decided to grab him, charge him with treason, throw him into the Old Fort prison, where the Constitutional Court is now. He set up a choir immediately. And eventually, after the long treason trial, the ANC sends him out of the country to mobilize internationally. Nelson Mandela going underground to mobilize internally. And I worked closely with him, a number of different things. And one day he says, he asked me to come in, can I help him? He's going to a world conference on religion. And can I help him prepare his speech? Now he knows I'm secular. And he doesn't go to the religious desk of the ANC. The religious desk say, we know that Catholic and there's a Methodist who's helped us. But he feels that I've got something that connects with him, that's deep inside him. And I feel there's something deep inside him that I can connect with. So it's all getting very fuzzy now. Fast forward, we're sitting in our temporary accommodation for the new Constitutional Court of South Africa, and we're being sworn in, jam-packed with people. Nelson Mandela is sitting there, makes a beautiful speech. The last time I was in court was to find out if I was going to be sentenced to death. Today, I inaugurate South Africa's first constitutional court on which our democracy depends. Very emotional moment. And we sworn in one by one. And when you're sworn in, you have a choice. You can raise your right arm and say, so help me God, or you can affirm. And I hear my colleagues, and most of them say, so help me God, raise their right arm. Some speak in English, Afrikaans, Setswana, isiZulu, Xhosa. It was very wonderful. And I'm the last. Sachs, I was alphabetically challenged. So we've gone through Chaskelson and Mokgoro and Sachs. What am I going to do? And I'm torn. I want to affirm. When I am approaching the age of 13 and my parents say, do you want a bar mitzvah? We'll support you if you do. If you don't want a bar mitzvah, we'll support you if you don't. And I'm thinking, and it's tough for a 12-year-old. And a 12-year-old in a very pious setting. Albie, when's your barmy? When's your barmy? And I was the youngest. That's why I could start practice at the age of 21. I graduated from school at the age of 15. So one by one, all the other Jewish boys, even like Kirsch, I remember, very secular, 2 weeks before he decides to have lessons and he does his barmy. And I'm thinking, if I go through the ritual of bar mitzvah, and I don't believe that God exists, I'm being disrespectful to my conscience, but also to God. I can't do it. Maybe the hardest decision I've taken in my life, because I had to do it entirely by myself. So I want to affirm at this important moment in my life. But I also want to remember why we got a constitution. I want to raise my right arm. This right arm, Ruth First, who was assassinated, Luxmont Silwandli, people I was close to, the first detainee to be tortured to death. Elijah Loza, I'd been in the underground with him, tortured to death. Jael Ngaba, assassinated. Babla Saluji, I played cricket with him, thrown out of the window. I wanted to take my oath to them, to the struggle, to why we'd fought, why we needed a constitution. So I raised my right arm and I said, so help me God. Contradictions. Let me just fast forward now with two other stories that came to me when I'm thinking of this marvelous chance to speak to people, progressive people. I don't have to work hard to get through to you. We're there. You know, we see the world in a way where we want to do something, we're dissatisfied with a lot, but also we're not dreary, gloomy people. We're spirited people, there's humor and fun and so on. So I'm happy to be here. And it's 1990. I'm back from exile, 24 years, maybe late 1990. And I get a message that a Mr. Michael Cassidy has flown down from Durban to speak to me. Now, he was the head of a very big, I think, evangelical church. He introduced himself. I think, why does he want to speak to me? And he says, we have a following of 1 million people. We welcome the onset of democracy, but there's just one thing. The Constitution must start with the words, in humble submission to Almighty God. If you can only get that there, he said, you'll be a hero to millions. Now that's very tempting to be a hero to millions. But I'm Albie, who's battling and wrestling with these things. I don't want to be dishonorable. And I don't want, just for the sake of getting people to come on board, to start our constitution with a kind of submission. The constitution is not about submission. It's about affirmation. It'd be affirmation of belief, of spirit, but it's not in that sense bending the knee. It can accept, if you're a believer, that there is something out there that's greater than all of us, but not in a mode of bending down and crouching. We'd fought to liberate, not to bend down. Anyway, these thoughts are going through my mind. At the same time, I'm thinking the great majority of South Africans are Christian. The great majority of Black people are Christian. Democracy shouldn't come as a shock. It shouldn't come as something that makes people feel it belongs to a world other than the world they live in and inhabit. They should feel a sense of comfort. They should feel more at home, more free, and not having to shut off a very fundamental part of themselves, very, very fundamental. So how do you deal with the contradictions? You find a way, I won't say we, you. I came up with the idea of Nkosi Sikeleli Africa. We would sing it, believers and non-believers alike. And I had a right arm, raising my right arm, Nkosi Sikeleli Africa, and with feeling and with emotion. That was a hymn of liberation, a hymn of unity, bringing us all together. So I said, can't we say Nkosi Sikeleli Africa? And then God seën Afrika, God protect Africa. Later on, Cyril Ramaphosa said, what about Shivenda and Chitsonga? So there's 6 statements, may God protect South Africa. And it's not crushing to those of us who are secular. We don't feel we're being forced, we're being oppressed by the very opening statement of the Constitution. We don't feel that that statement is somehow like a tonic, a sound, a signal that runs through everything, that you have to interpret every single clause on the basis of in humble submission to mighty God. It's in the preamble, at the end of the preamble. It comes in poetically and beautifully in a resonant way. And I feel joyous that we'd found that solution. Instead of the invocation of God being a cause of clash and division and disputation, it actually became unifying. And it was thanks to Michael Cassidy provoking the issue that we got that, and it's in our Constitution today. The second story is, in a way, for this occasion. I haven't been a judge for very long, and I'm told that there's an organization called Friends of the Guggenheim Museum visiting South Africa. And they'll be in Cape Town at a certain time. You're a judge on the Constitutional Court. Can you speak to them? So I remember meeting them at a tea room at the castle, and there about 30 or 40 of them. I thought Friends of the Guggenheim meant that they all very arty people, learned. It's not that. You book a plane as a friend, you get a cheap flight, hotel's cheaper, and then you get the judge to address you all. So I'm speaking to the head of their group. I forget her name now. And I'm telling her very enthusiastically, and we did it. We got this transition from racial autocracy to a very open democracy, one of the most democratic constitutions in the world, relatively peacefully. And she's saying, it's a miracle. It's a miracle. 3 Jews on the Constitutional Court. That was the miracle. So it's when I told that story to a Jewish group in Toronto, they wanted to know, what's the point of the story? Any event. So Arthur Chaskelson, Chief Justice, Richard Goldstone, Albie Sachs. And one of the first cases, I'm just going on, I'm in a flow a little.
Well, you know, Albie, I think at this point, and I'd love you to go on, but I think we must let the audience into a secret. And that is that when we were planning this event, I originally, on behalf of the congregation, asked Albie to give a lecture. And then Albie said, no, it'd be much more fun if we have a conversation. But he said, you know, also, and this was now an email exchange, and I could almost hear his naughty little smile in the email. He said, you must agree to let me stray just a little bit. So I think we all agree wholeheartedly that when Albie Sachs strays, you get the most wonderful kaleidoscope of wit and wisdom and humor and humanity. So Albie, absolutely great. Please go to the cases now and we'll roll as we roll.
Okay. So the first case that raised the question in the Constitutional Court of the meaning of religious freedom couldn't have been more banal, more weird than it actually was. 7-Eleven, not the greatest upholders of fundamental rights, propagators of religious freedom, wanted to sell beer and wine on Sundays. And the law said no sales of beer and wine on Sundays, Good Friday, and Boxing Day. Christmas, sorry, and Christmas, on Christmas. And they had many other arguments, but this is the one that occupied the attention of the judges the most. And there used to be the old joke, you have 3 Jews and you have 4 opinions. But we had 3 Jews on the court and we had 3 opinions, not 4. So Richard went one way, Arthur another way, and I went a third way. So you've got the issue. Simple challenge now. It's not, if the law is unconstitutional, even if it doesn't affect you directly, but you've got an interest in it, even if it doesn't infringe on your personal freedoms, you can challenge the law. Objectively, it's unconstitutional. And 7-Eleven was saying it's unconstitutional. Arthur and 3 colleagues said, where's the invasion of religious freedom? People can carry on with their prayers, organizing their lives according to their beliefs. There's no entrenchment at all on religious freedom. The prohibition isn't unconstitutional. Richard, Cato Regan, I forget who the third, says no. There's an equality issue here. These are all Christian holidays. You can make that prohibition, but then you've got to include Muslim holidays, and you've got to include Jewish holidays. And they stopped there, but they could have gone on Hindu holidays to get equality. So it's 4-3 now. They say it is unconstitutional. I'm agreeing with Arthur. This is not a religious freedom issue at all. And I said, even if it, okay, these are Christian holidays, it's so tiny. There's this principle in law, de minimis, the law's not concerned with trifles. And my law clerk, Fatima Laher, her eyebrow goes up. It's the only time I've changed my legal opinion because somebody's eyebrow went up. And she said, you know, Albie, it seems like a small thing, but it's these small things that make people in my community feel they're not fully welcome in this country. And that triggered the memory for me of Gandhi's struggles. And I'll start reading, and it's so hard to find literature on Gandhi in South Africa. He spent 20 years here. He developed his whole philosophy here, and it was difficult to find the materials. But in one of the books, the story of the prohibition by the colonial authorities, recognition of Muslim and Hindu marriages on the basis that they were potentially polygamous. And that was based on a case taken from the High Court in England of a Mormon marriage, where the English judge refused to give a divorce, saying you weren't properly married in the first case. And now, given the racist character and the Christian hegemonic character of judges in South Africa, they are now saying your marriages aren't real marriages, because a real marriage is a marriage between one man and one woman for life, and yours, even if it is one man and one woman, they are potentially polygamous. They're not real marriages. So Gandhi writes about our mothers and our sisters and our daughters going to jail, saying that their sacrifice was greater than ours, armed, he says, only with the patriotism of faith, which is a very beautiful phrase that I'm happy to pass on to the shul here, the patriotism of faith. Their sacrifices. It's something deep in the souls of now the great-grandchildren of that generation who still feel that intersectionality of race and religion. So these tiny little symbolic things hurt. So now I'm responding to the emotion that she stirs up in me. And I discover American writing, Sandra Day O'Connor, dealing with the cases of the nativity plays. The local town council would put on a nativity play in the center of the town. And people started objecting. Jewish families said, it's not for us. Other faiths said, it's not for us. And she said the fault here is not suppressing religion, it's the state endorsing religion, the state singling out. So that was the answer to Arthur and the answer to Richard. The state can't single out four and say it's okay. The state can't single out any. The state can't impose a heterodoxy, an orthodoxy of belief in what it does. It doesn't mean the state can't be responsive to religion, to beliefs. The state can't work with, collaborate with, the issue of prayer in schools and so on. These things can be adapted and so on. But the state can't declare a public holiday based on a religious tenet. But I'm also saying, in the days of Calvinist rule, this was serious. Now these are tiny relics of that past. And the impact on religion is very slight. It is an endorsement, but very, very slight. And I found secular justifications. All these holidays happen to be double holidays. And I said, if the prohibition on selling hard liquor on those days is sustained, it's sustained because it diminishes drunken driving, it diminishes spousal abuse. On the secular grounds, it can be justifiable. That's the limitations on, so it did trench upon, it did infringe the right of living in open democratic society where the state is not endorsing particular religion, but in a very small way, and there was a secular justification. So in the end, it was 4 saying it's okay, plus 2 saying it's okay. And that the next Sunday, I remember going to my local Pick and Pay to buy some beer. And they said, they didn't actually say, those stupid judges said the law's okay, but that was more or less the impact. So I mention that just to say the question of freedom of religion doesn't come out in a straightforward, direct, simple way. The next case, the Christian education schools case. A group of American educators believed that the Bible commanded them, spare the rod, spoil the child. It was their duty. And they set up schools based on that belief, and parents sent their children to school based on that belief. They found they weren't getting very far in America. They came to South Africa. To their credit, they beat black bums and white bums, so they were non-racial. New government prohibits corporal punishment in schools. They say we're not against the prohibition, but we're entitled to a religious exemption. It's our belief system. And often these funny kind of cases, Arthur would give them to me, you know, Albie, you deal with that. And it was hard. I've told you how important conscience was for me. My sticking up for my conscience may be very respecting of the conscience of others. Not the content, the conscience. That's in their heads. Those are your beliefs. I respect that. It's important to you, fundamental to you. On the other hand, the school I went to, we had a teacher called Nobby Knowles. I was the only boarder at school for 2 years while he was teaching us. And he would find some misdemeanor. Now, I was a goody. But he'd say, Sachs, you're talking too loudly. See me in my study at the boarding house. I go to his study, bend over, take down your pants, 6 of the best. Hard, sore. I cried for 1 day, a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. After 3 weeks, I said, I'm not going to cry anymore. I just took it. I didn't cry for another 10 years over anything. That's what they teach you at school. Boys don't cry. You don't blub. And it's grossly unjust, but I just took it. Years later, I'm in solitary confinement. The back of the Wynberg Magistrates Court, there's some cells, and I hear the kids being beaten with a cane, starting about 5 o'clock. You'd hear the scream, whack, screaming, cover my ears. Imagine you feel you're making society better by inflicting pain. What kind of society is it? Hating. So I hate corporal punishment. I believe in conscience. What do you do now in relation to the school? And in America, the Supreme Court had a case where a very conservative, very religious judge, Scalia, in the case of some Native Americans who wanted to smoke peyote, which was a banned substance as part of their religion, he said, in effect, tough luck, the price you pay for living in a democratic society, as long as you're not being targeted as such. But if the impact of the law happens to hit you hard, too bad. And I felt, no. If it had been the Catholic Church to which he belonged, he wouldn't have said that. But they're too powerful. So it's the small minority religious groups who need these protections. In the end, I came up with the phrase that in an open democratic society, people can't carve out exemptions from the general law simply on the basis of their religious beliefs. At the same time, the state must do everything reasonably possible to accommodate those beliefs. It must go out of its way to accommodate those beliefs. And I'm happy to say that phrase was picked up in a case in England by the House of Lords about the approach, reasonable accommodation of religious beliefs wherever possible. I was also thinking of a case down the line, and I said, applying that in that particular case, the parents could continue to practice their beliefs in the home, provided it didn't breach the common law relating to assault. But the teachers couldn't do it in the public realm of the school. And I said it was sad that the schoolboys themselves weren't asked for their opinions. So it upheld the prohibition, it didn't grant the exemption, and I left it to the courts to decide whether chastisement in the home is permissible or not. And a few years ago, the Constitutional Court said it's not. You can't beat your child, even so-called reasonably. You can't clap your child under the common law. I was thinking ahead the case of the Rastafari. And Gareth Enver Prince, quite a decent law student, passes his exams. He wants to enroll as an article clerk as an attorney. And the Law Society say, sorry, but you've twice been convicted of possessing dacha. You've broken the law. Give us an undertaking that you won't do it again, and we'll sign you on. And he said, I can't. It's part of my religion. It's a central part of my religion. And it's not doing any harm to anybody. And he's saying liquor does more harm, tobacco does more harm. It's central to me. And he applies to court. High Court says no, it's a general law enforcing the drugs, drug control and so on. We can't get an exemption for you. It comes to the Constitutional Court. They're standing at the back of the court. I'm so irritated by them. They've dreadlocks. And they say, why is everybody looking at us? But worse than that, they're saying, take it easy. Tomorrow's another day. Relax, you're driven. I want to be driven. Don't tell me I'm stupid for being driven. But I feel for him. He's willing to sacrifice his career for his beliefs. And that's very meaningful for me. And most religions start off against the law. Most religions have known persecution. They've been small religions. Sometimes they become big religions. Sometimes they become big religions that persecute others. So I'm saying that just as during Prohibition in America, Catholics could take the sacramental wine, so there should be space for smoking dacha in controlled circumstances. And we divided 5-4. And if two of my colleagues hadn't been on holiday at that time, it's one of those few cases where the majority might have gone the other way by pure accident. There were intense emotions amongst the judges. And I'm applying the reasonable accommodation test. We couldn't even agree on the press summary afterwards. And to rub salt into the wounds of the majority, the editor of the Star published almost the whole of my judgment and gave them just one little column. I'm sure the editor of the Star then himself was a dacharoka. Now, years pass, and it's not to grant an exemption just to the Rastafari, but it's a general declaration by the Constitutional Court that the private use of dacha, to prohibit that, is unconstitutional. But in a way, he was paving the way. He was paving the way, opening up the way. I'm going to mention two more cases. One, I think her name was Daniels, a Muslim woman married to a Muslim man, living in a council house in Cape Town. And when the lease given to her late husband, man, said, on the death of the registered owner, his surviving spouse can take over the tenancy. So she says, I'm surviving spouse. And they say, no, you're not. A spouse has to be legally married. Muslim marriages aren't recognized. It's not a marriage. And I feel a kind of, if you can have a thing called judicial rage, in terms of the total, utter injustice of it. It's going along with prejudice, the prejudice, hegemonic prejudice now, applying not even to religion, applying to living on. Everybody call them husband and wife. And I'm saying you don't even have to strike down the law.
He says you must mute your
Because
screen.
spouse includes her in English language, in the behavior of everybody who knew them. And so you don't have to strike down the law and say Parliament must change it or the Council must change it. You simply give a constitutional interpretation remedying the interpretations that were furnished by prejudice before. And Decha Moseneke dissented. He said it was unjust, unfair, but he said spouses come to mean, because of the courts, married spouse, legally not married, but the great majority went along with my interpretation. The final case, same-sex marriage. I'll start that story. I thought it was 1991, but it was actually later than that. 92, maybe 93. I'm driving in Cape Town. I haven't been back for very long, so I'm sweating. It's a hot November day. I'm sweating. I'm sweating because I don't know the road so well. I've been in exile for so long. But the main reason I'm sweating is I'm going to go on a gay pride march for the first time. And I wish, oh, if only there could be a poster that says straights for gays. And then I feel so ashamed of myself. You're going, Albie. You're going or you're not going. Any event, I'm sweating. I get to town, I'm late, and I see the marchers coming towards me. I park the car. The first poster I see says, "Suck, don't swallow." Oh my God. I'm going to be in the Cape Times tomorrow for sure. And I see Edwin Cameron marching. And I knew Edwin Cameron as a wonderful law professor, lecturer, and a great writer. And I get into the group and I march next to Edwin. And I feel terrific. I feel great. I feel I've crossed over something. I feel proud. I feel proud to be marching with people who are fighting for their rights. It's a very beautiful, very special moment for me. And afterwards, we go up to Duval Park, where I used to go as a kid. I'm asked to say something. I'm rushing off to a meeting. And I say, when I was a kid, I would come here and the benches said whites only, but they could have said straights only. And I said, the issue of rights for gay men, lesbian women is important not only for a section of the community that has been harshly treated by the law. It's important for South Africa because of difference. Because of difference. If we can't manage to live as equals in our difference, we are finished as a country. So in that sense, it was a touchstone for something much wider than just removing a form of insult and harshness. Fast forward, it's now 2005, early on, maybe 2004, and Pius Lange, Chief Justice at that stage, says, Albie, we've got a group coming to Johannesburg called Christian Lawyers for Africa. And they've asked me to speak at the opening of their conference. I'll be away during the court recess. Is there anybody who will be here who can attend? I'm on duty, Pius. I don't think I'm the right person. He says, you're just the right person. And I know what he means. If he goes, he's Christian, he's a lawyer, then it's sectarian. If I go, I'm speaking on behalf of the court. I'm not proselytizing or identifying with a particular belief. So now I'm being driven this time. It's cool, April, Joburg. I'm not sweating, but I'm uncomfortable. What do I say to them? I can't just say, have a good conference, welcome. They are people of conscience. So I tell them the story about taking the oath. And I think they might be angry with me. I'm raising my right arm for my secular beliefs. And I'm taking the name of the Lord, but not for the sake of the Lord, but for the sake of my secular beliefs. They stood up and they cheered. And I invite them to come to the court for me to take them on a tour. I take them on a tour of the court. They love it. It's moving. It's for people who haven't been. It's right in the heart of the old Fort Prison. We've got this beautiful new court with wonderful artwork. It's symbolically meaningful. It's imaginative. It's warm. It's friendly. It's inviting. And I say, sorry, I have to leave. They say, no, we must lay on hands. Now it's about 50 hands, take a long time. And I'm late for my meeting, but they're giving me their hands with love. And I accept it from them with love. I don't interpret it in the same way, but I accept the gesture. And then I'm about to leave. They say, no, we must say a prayer. And some prayers are short and to the point. Some go round the world. I see you know what I'm talking about.
I think we do, yeah.
I'm sure it doesn't ever happen in the shul.
Oh, no, never
Never,
here,
never,
Rabbi.
never, never, never,
Never
never.
here.
And finally, the prayer is over and I rush away. Now, I mention that because I've been asked to superintend the same-sex marriages case, known as the Fourie case. And these two experiences are not directly in my consciousness, but they're there. It's the two groupings, if you like, most intensely concerned with the issue of same-sex marriage. And can I find a way of responding that for the one to win, the other doesn't have to lose. They lose the outcome, but they don't have to feel defeated. For the one to win, the other must die. It's unfortunate if the highest court in the land gets involved in these cultural wars, moving the front line this way or that, victory, defeat, judges are appointed according to the positions they take on issues like that. It's so destructive. And it's very, very clear. We've even got a textual indication in our Constitution. The Equality Clause says no discrimination on the grounds of race, color, creed, etc., sexual orientation, disability, it's there. But the argument of the Catholic family group was we can protect the rights of same-sex couples to tenancies, to succession, to visits, hospital, prison, and so on, but don't call it marriage. It's all about the M word. But the whole point was to call it marriage for equality. And we had to respond to that particular argument. We had to respond to the separate but equal argument. Remember separate but equal? Blacks on this side, whites on that side. American society, in the end, it's never equal. It's segregating out. Even if the facilities are the same, it's saying you don't belong. We had to deal with equality of the vineyard, equality of the graveyard. Do you strike down the Marriage Act so that nobody can use the M word? I marry you, or I take you to be my lawful husband, stroke wife, stroke spouse, or if same-sex couples can't do it, then nobody does it. That's equality of the graveyard. And you imagine you'd get equality of resentment. The queer community saying, just when we're about to get to the mountaintop, you're taking away the mountaintop. And straight couples will say, we can't get married anymore because of these pesky people. That can't be what the Constitution intended. All of these things had to be dealt with. But the main thing was the relation between the sacred and the secular. And a large portion of the judgment then, after stating, under our Constitution, it's very clear that same-sex couples are constitutionally entitled as human beings, as people, to publicly express their love, their commitment, and undertake the responsibilities that go to their same-sex partners as heterosexual couples do. Very clear. Our text supports it, and if we fail to do that, then we're going along with historic discrimination. And discrimination isn't justified because it's always been like that. That's all the more reason to make it, let's stop now. And two-tree can never be justification for discrimination. That's very, very clear. At the same time, we can respect people, they've quoted sections of the Bible to us, scripture. It's very important for them in terms of their belief. And the same constitution that protects the rights of same-sex couples to express their love, commitment, and accept their responsibilities, protects the rights of faith communities not to be compelled to perform celebrations or do anything else that go against their fundamental beliefs. There's a coexistence between the sacred and the secular. It's not a war between the two. And the religious people then don't have the right to impose their beliefs on couples who don't share those beliefs, who have a right under the Constitution. At the same time, people who have a very strong commitment to equality and sexual equality in this particular way don't have any right to impose a compulsory performance of marriages that would go against their beliefs or other things inside the domain of their faith community that would violate their beliefs. They are protected in that way. It's the same constitution, covers both. And in the judgment, there are paragraphs, there's paragraph after paragraph speaking about the importance of religion, not simply as something people are entitled to do as part of their privacy for themselves. The importance of religion in public life in our country. It's been important for education, for health. It's been important for many people whose foundation of their fundamental rights and Bill of Rights comes from their religious faith. And I know on my court, my colleagues were religious first and then became supporters of Bill of Rights afterwards as a way of manifesting in practical life out there in public what was central to their belief and their particular faith. So I could say how important religion is in public life as part of the temper of the nation. I could say it more easily because I'm secular. I'm not proselytizing. I'm not holding up a banner for religion to try and bring people along or make them feel ashamed because they're not believers. I'm saying, because now I'm the judge, and seeing how important it is for the South Africa we want, that faith communities can feel secure in their beliefs. If their belief involves stoning to death for adultery, not under our constitution, there are limits to that kind of a thing. But the core beliefs are protected. At the same time, the fundamental rights of all our people are also protected. And I'll just end now with two little sequels to that. The one with the South African Council of Churches called it a Solomonian judgment. I felt so pleased. Partly my dad was Solly, and he would have been very thrilled. But that was exactly what I wanted people to feel, that they'd been listened to, that the importance of religion had been respected, that they're not being told you are bigots, that you are backward, that you are benighted, that we are enlightened and you're benighted. That's not the issue at all. It's your beliefs there, you're protected within your faith community doing it, and they felt it made it so much easier for then we sent the matter to Parliament and said you've got 1 year to amend the Marriage Act or amend the law in such a way as to enable same-sex couples in effect to say, I do. The two shortest words in the English language, the most private and the most public at the same time. I marry you. And in a very curious way, at the end of the year, Parliament did. If Parliament failed to do it, then the court would have written in the word spouse ourselves. We didn't give them a choice on the content, we gave them a choice on the modality. There's been some division amongst legal opinion on that. Same-sex couples should have had the right from 10 a.m. the next morning, But I feel that the public acceptance of and involvement with and debates about same-sex relationships and marriages was much stronger after a year of national discussion and debate than it would have been if it had simply been a court-ordered marriage. It would have looked like a strange thing, just the court marriage, not a real marriage. So in that sense, I feel, and my colleagues were very, very strong on the issue, send it to Parliament. Parliament not with a maybe, but simply with a how. The last story is maybe 10 days after the law's been amended. I'm driving in Kirstenbosch in Cape Town, and I'm looking for the signs. And it says, to Amy and Jean's marriage. And I feel fantastic. Even as I tell it to you now, I'm getting gooseflesh, just remembering that moment, that simple little thing. And Jean was South African, went to Washington, worked in the Holocaust Museum, in fact, met Amy, they fell in love. They couldn't marry in America. They came here and they married. And Jean said she'd phoned the tea house to book the reception fine. And then she said, I think I must tell you, we are both women. And the manager, she said, how wonderful, you'll be our first.
Well, Albie, thank you. Thank you so much. I think for sharing a really vivid sense of how religion and constitutional rights interface. And on the face of it, I think religious groups might feel a little bit nervous. After all, our constitution is resolutely secular, although it does include, obviously, the rights to freedom of belief, including religious belief. It allows people to publicly profess their religions. It gives them ways of expressing their religious personality in the workplace. It allows them to educate their children in terms of their particular religious convictions. But somehow there might have been a sense of uneasiness because the state is still the protector of those prerogatives. And if we look down the long corridors of history, it's all too easy to see how, under the guise of protecting religion, the state has actually taken advantage to impose a particular religion, to coerce people, and in fact to suppress diversity. But I think you've shown us the wisdom of this system, its extraordinary foresight and flexibility, its fairness and its humanity. And you've done that with such wit and with such humor and with a lot of straying, but for that we forgive you absolutely. And I just like to close off by saying that I think you also did this in a very Jewish way. I've always been taken by the wonderful Hasidic narrative of a succession of rabbis who, whenever there was some kind of crisis in the Eastern European community, would go to a particular place in the forest at a particular time. They'd go through a particular ritual and they'd recite particular words and they'd ask the Eternal for a miracle, and the miracle would come and the people would be saved. And then with the passage of time, of course, things got forgotten. The place got forgotten, and the time got forgotten, and the ritual got forgotten, and the special words got forgotten. And so the great Baal Shem Tov sat with his head in his hands and he said to the Almighty, I don't know what to do. I don't know the place. I don't know the time. I don't know the ritual. I don't know the words. All I know is the story. But the miracle still happens. And the famous writer Elie Wiesel, so well known for his recollections of the Shoah, says, what is the moral of all this? God created human beings because he loves stories. And I think you're very much in touch with that understanding. And I won't use the dreaded word privilege. Let's say just we're enormously fortunate and blessed to have someone like you who served for 15 years on our highest court in the country and who helped to shape our Constitution. So let's have a very solid round of applause for Albie. So thank you. And we are running a little bit over time, but I think it is well worth it. We now need to move to the questions. So as Leslie said, we will alternate questions between members of the live audience, and then Leslie will be dealing with the questions via Zoom. If you are a member of the live audience who'd like to ask a question, please just raise a hand, and then we'll ask you to come forward to the mic so that we can capture you on camera and also so that the sound is good. So I think I see a hand from the gentleman right at the back. Please come forward and ask your question. We've noted the second person. Leslie will take a Zoom question and then we'll come back to this room. Thank you, Keturah. We'll try to include as many people as we can.
I think we're actually fortunate having you both in the room for this question. I'm conscious of what's going on in America with their constitution and the fact that there's this movement they call originalism that's come along and essentially started to take away some of the rights that have been accepted by most of the people in the country for quite some time. I'm thinking of abortion. I'm thinking of the threats to same-sex marriage, to even interracial marriage, for that matter. Are you not worried that, I'll use the term flirtation with religion within the constitutional boundaries could lead at some point in the future to some of the rights that you're agreeing to now being removed at some point later for religious reasons? And you compare that with other options that we could have used in this country. As an example, I'm thinking of when you talk about marriage, in most European countries, marriage is a state function, not a religious function. So to have a marriage recognized, you have to go to a civil function rather than through a religious function. And the state protects the secular nature constitutionally of the rights of individuals first, and then allows religion to flourish after that. I'm just curious if you worry that in 50 or 100 years, some of these issues might not have been answered in this country.
Thank you very much. Albie?
Sorry, I didn't, my hearing's not as good as it should be.
I think
Could you summarize it? Yeah.
I think what this gentleman is saying is that we need to distinguish very sharply between the state and the religious functions, for example, in phenomena like marriage, and that over a protracted period, the kind of benign and liberal outlook that has been taken by the Constitution might be eroded, and that there might therefore be prospects of abuse as that erosion takes place. Does that summarize the question? Thank you. So that's the question, Albie.
We certainly have to be alerted to that, but our experience has been the total opposite. In South Africa with same-sex marriage, it's, I wouldn't say it's banal now, but you get reports in the newspapers, they discuss who was wearing what and the catering, and it's just accepted now. And in an amazingly short time, in South Africa, what's become accepted with passage of time is, I don't even like the word tolerance. It's like you doing something a favor, putting up with something. Is humanity, is love. And it's not to say that homophobia is gone. It articulates itself in vicious forms. In particular areas, Black women have been gruesomely treated and so on. So that's not automatic, but certainly the same-sex marriage. And it's reached a stage now where Parliament was able to pass a law. Before there was a conscience clause, marriage officers who had conscientious beliefs could say, get somebody else to do it. Now they can't. So the direction has been the opposite to what you fear, which is not to say that we don't have to be constantly alert. I would say generally in the world, this is something now that's been very affirmative and positive. When people say the world is getting worse, there's one area where internationally the reduction of homophobia and the cruel conduct of state conduct in relation to people perceived as different in that way is giving away, not automatically, but profoundly.
I mean, I was just thinking, Albie, when we were talking before the lecture, we discussed a comment made by Judge Dikgang Moseneke that no right in the Constitution is more important than any other right. And he said, we have the right to be different. But in a sense, then, isn't our Constitution also a structure or a system which is defined by the rights? But at the same time, the rights themselves determine their relationships to one another, so that it's the integrity of that Constitution as dynamic structure which would uphold these kinds of liberties and freedoms, unless, of course, we got to the point where someone began to unpick the Constitution as a whole. And then one could see that there would be very real risks or very real dangers. Leslie, do you have a Zoom question?
There are a few here, and I'm going to use my editorial prerogative.
Use your prerogative,
here,
yes.
and rather interpret the question than read it to you directly. I may be completely wrong. There's a sense of hostility in the question, so I'm going to phrase it slightly differently. The question is, and I'm not sure I heard you say that you're a secular Jew. But the question says, if you call yourself a secular Jew, why do you use Jew as an adjective and not Buddhist or Muslim? In other words, what part of you is Jewish and what part of you is secular? that, excuse me, person who asked the question, that's my rephrasing of this question.
I think part of the Jewish part of me is a preoccupation. What is a good Jew? And the preoccupation started with Cyril Harris speaking at the funeral of Joe Slover in Orlando at the cemetery. And Cyril Harris said, Joe Slover was a good Jew. And it's a very striking statement to make. And I was a little disappointed because I adored Cyril Harris. He made great speeches at the inauguration. He felt passionate. He looked like Isaiah, one of the great prophets, with that beard and the voice, the Scottish accent, I think.
Yes, he was Scottish.
But the feeling, the emotion was so strong. And he felt South Africa is being liberated from apartheid. It's not getting rid of this awkward, nasty thing, but being liberated. The sadness was that as an Orthodox rabbi, I'm told afterwards, he could be very, very strict in ways that I think were quite inhuman, and particularly impact on women and in other ways like that. But some years later, I'm in London, and I'd been invited by the president of their Supreme Court, Nick Phillips, to stay at his house for a couple of days. He'd seen the jail diary of Albie Sachs many years before. We met at a conference. He'd come to London, come and stay with us. So I'm staying with him. And he said, I'm off to court today. Maybe you'd like to come. I have to decide who is a good Jew. And it was the Jewish Free School in London had forbidden entry to the children of a father who was Jewish and the mother who'd been converted. And it was creating huge tension in London. And the case came to the court. And the Race Discrimination Act didn't forbid discrimination on the grounds of religion or religious doctrine. It did on the grounds of race. And the argument that was upheld by a small majority, including Nick Phillips, was because in terms of the Orthodox treatment of who is a Jew, going through the mother, it's a biological thing, therefore it's race. And 5 judges agreed. But the time I was there was somebody from the Jewish Board of Deputies who was asked to say, how would you define a good Jew? And he's walking on eggs, you know? He doesn't want to offend anybody. So he said, there are 3 factors. Do you have a mezuzah?
I think we've lost the connection.
Lost connection. Who's there?
Jean-Marie, I see you've been made host. Perhaps you could let them know that we've lost the connection with the shul.
Tell Laza to mute your screen. We hear the messages. Shame, I think everybody lost it.
We can hear you, Eliza. I think we've all got the connection. I think it's just that we've lost the shul.
Yeah, it looks like maybe there's load shedding in the shul. Yeah, because many people are left out on, yeah, it's possible the shul problem.
I'll phone my sister and let her know that we are not able to hear the proceedings, and perhaps she can tell Mr. Cohen.
I see that as a plus for our society, even if I don't myself immerse myself in communal activities. I speak to so many groups. I asked my dentist in Cape Town, because they had a small group of Jewish dentists. I said, Martin, are you a Jew who's a dentist or a dentist who's a Jew? I was teasing him. I come back 3 months later for my next appointment. He said, Albie, you know, I've been thinking about that. And he didn't know quite the answer. I spoke to Jewish ex-servicemen. I spoke to young Jewish women, the ORT, to so many different groups. And I was happy to do that. And I wanted them to feel that they belong, rooted here as part and parcel of a very diverse South African nation. I don't go to shul unless I'm talking the way I'm talking now. I was persuaded to go to shul by Patricia Salkas. She was then the mayor of Cape Town. She had very powerful bait. Nelson Mandela was coming to address the shul. And it was wonderful. I hated the woman sitting upstairs. I found it shocking, you know, not just uncomfortable. It was like distressing. But I loved the way he connected and the way he spoke. And it wasn't a party political speech. He said, many of your children are living in Australia and Vancouver and all over, and they've made new lives for themselves, and that's fine. But let them feel connected. Let them help us in different ways to build up South Africa. He just got the right register, and that was a very kind of happy occasion for me. And then I went up to, it wasn't the New York Bagels, I think it was still Millie's then. And the people came rushing up afterwards. They were so excited, so excited. And I felt comfortable in that delicatessen. You know, I felt comfortable there. So they're all little, I don't know, little, if anti-Semites are looking for Jewishness, they'll find it. And at a tragic level, when I was in Prague in 1969, it was still communist Czechoslovakia, and they told me about the Jewish cemetery, and I went there. My wife, Stephanie Kemp, was not Jewish. We went there together, and it was like a hill because they had to bury on top and bring in sand because of the ghetto. But there are two little shuls there filled with hangings. And the guide said to me, Hitler ordered that all synagogues should be wiped out in Czechoslovakia, but we'll keep these two synagogues as museums to an extinct race. And I went back and I wept. I wept. And Stephanie said, well, it's not just horrible to Jews. I said, I know it's not just horrible to Jews, but it was my family in Lithuania that were wiped out. It's visceral for me.
Right.
And I don't stand for anti-Semitism. And it's indirect ways of answering that question. Certainly, as long as there's anti-Semitism in the world, I'm a proud Jew. That's for sure.
Well, thank you, Albie. I think we're running out of time, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm going to take that gentleman at the back who was the second to put his hand up, and Leslie will take one more Zoom question, and then I think we're going to have to.
Well, I'm just standing here to say that there are no more Zoom questions.
All right.
So let's just take one question.
Let's just take one more
Yeah.
question here then from this gentleman who was the second.
Thank you for coming to have a chat with us. It was a lovely conversation. And somehow I wanted to just start off to say I was born in 1992. So in a way, you know, it's more of a history conversation. It's got all the aspects of, because I'm actually a lawyer as well. So it's a mix of the law lecture that we never got in a way. So that's where I wanted to start off. But my question is more in a sense of thinking about, say, the rights such as human dignity as a value, as a right, and somehow being a bridge among not only religions, because humanity cuts across religions, but it's also something that brings constitutions in different countries together. So in a way, you know, we focus on the negative aspects where there's tension between religious values and you know, secular, these are the stuff that the state has to do. But this one being the bridge that cuts across not only religions, but also in law. So I wanted you, if you can, to comment on the value of that, or if there is any.
Sorry, what?
Can I repeat that?
Can you sum it up in a...
Okay, let me sum it up. So say, for example, what is your sense of human dignity as something that humanity is something that can bridge the divide between religion and the law?
All right. So I think the core of the question, and it's a very good question to end on, so thank you, is can you perceive any way of bridging between religion and the law? Is there something that is somehow inherently human about us that would form a connection?
I'd say most of my colleagues on the Constitutional Court were religious, but that covers a huge range, as you know. Even within one religion, there are vast differences. And it was very moving to me, actually, that from very different philosophical beginnings, existential positions each one of us had, through the prism of the Constitution, that document made by the people through their representatives in the Constitutional Assembly, drawing on a history of people struggling for freedom, for rights, for dignity, equality, freedom everywhere, we could come to agreement on things. So in that sense, I see the Constitution as serving as in a way, a mechanism that enables not only coexistence, but dialogue between conceptual universes that otherwise might be separated. they all can find their way into the Constitution and produce outcomes that belong in the public sphere, that are secular, but that would have been informed by, in many cases, by religious beliefs, but ultimately expressed not in terms of doctrine. And I remember saying to Mr. Smythe from the Catholic Alliance or the Family Alliance in the same-sex marriage case, how much one can respect your sincerity when you say that marriage is for the church before the state came in, and that the church gets its doctrinal input from the scriptures. But it'd be a terrible day if the court is now interpreting the scriptures. If the rabbis can disagree amongst themselves, how can Albie Sachs tell the rabbis what the Torah or the Talmud means?
Right.
Let alone Pius Langer or Yvonne Mohoro or Zach Yakub. So again, it's for me, the connections are I see it as often core ideas are very similar, but they're expressed within a different framework. So it could be on lots of things that are happening in the world. Merle and I will agree completely, but you would get there using scripture. It could be important to you. Jewish learning. I follow a completely different route. Completely different route. I find it sometimes even strange. I'm not sharing in it. I'm not taking part in that culture. Like I could get on so well with Oliver Tambo in very profound, very deep things. So it's the shared core or essence that is expressed, articulated in particular scriptural formats and institutional arrangements for many people, very meaningful for them. But coming down to similar outcomes. And maybe that's why we can all listen to music. And it can be music that's religious music, it could be non-religious music. We all get joy from it. Maybe there's a music in humanity that's not literal. The literal part divides us, and we use it sometimes as an instrument, as a weapon for division, for conquest, for exclusion, marginalization. But the core sound, the resonance is something deeper. And I certainly found that in practice. I think that's the core of the idea of equality. It's not only don't be nasty to others. It's actually joyous to be kind. It's liberating. It's a generosity. It's not only thou shalt not, and sometimes thou shalt not overwhelms religious doctrine and rules and commandments. And I find that part, it's not only whether you have a life after death separates me, but okay, I'm separated. You might believe that there's a spiritual life after death. I don't, if I'm wrong. I've got a arrangement with my wife. If she communicates with me after I go, she can say, I told you so. We can argue till we die. We can't get agreement on that, but we agree on so much. And I don't think it should be forced. I don't think just for the sake of coherence or not disagreeing, we should pretend to believe. I don't think we should water down our beliefs simply to make them acceptable. I think beliefs should be intense. Otherwise, they're not beliefs, they're just like opinions. But I believe, though, that beliefs don't have to be antagonistic, repulsive to each other, and that it's always worthwhile. I support the interfaith movement because I've got no faith at all. So I can be equally, if you like, equally secular at all. And yeah, that gets me into a synagogue. If it's part of a march from St. George's Cathedral to the shul to the mosque, that'll get me into a synagogue.
Well, that was, I think, very much Franz's philosophy too. Although he was very conscious of his Jewish identity, his autobiography had the wonderful title, No Single Loyalty. And perhaps that's one of the topics we've been talking about this evening, the overarching function of the Constitution and the way in which multiple religious identities and loyalties can be accommodated under that umbrella and can in fact enrich, if you like, the tapestry of South African life. So now I'm going to hand over to Diane to round off the evening and to say the final vote of thanks to Albie.
Thank you. I'd like to first acknowledge all those who've contributed to making this evening a great success. Firstly, the Auerbach family, represented by Margaret here in Shul, who've given us the opportunity to host this event in memory of Franz year after year. And it's really, I want to say privilege, but I'm scared of this word privilege now. The Beit Emmanuel team, Paul, Leslie, Rabbi, Robin, and everyone involved. You've generously assisted with setting up the Zoom video, which Hanru has managed. Russell, you've helped throughout this process. And Professor Williams, thank you. Without you, this conversation would not have flowed so easily, and just the simple questions which you ask have stimulated wonderful stories and wonderful meaning tonight. Thank you. Tally, you're still sitting here. I hope you can match up with us next year when you come and present the Auerbach lecture next year. And we look forward to that. And now to Justice Sachs. It's been a great honor to have you here tonight. Your contribution to the struggle for democracy and to the constitutional framework for our democracy has made a significant impact on our country and on all of us. You're a role model for us. And in this time of uncertainty and pessimism about the state of our nation, this is an incredibly important reminder of all that we can stand for, of the best that we can achieve. We continue to learn from your example. My husband and I, Alan and I, often take a tour group around, or different tour groups around Constitution Hill and the fort. He was an awaiting trial political prisoner at the fort. And we always end, our last section is in the Constitutional Court, and we stand in front of the photographs of the justices, especially the justices of the first court. And we talk about each in turn, and we talk about you, Justice Sachs, and your enormous contribution to our Constitution. And then we let people wander through the art, which is also a credit to you. The fact of your willingness to be here tonight is amazing. I think that this is a congregation which combines the secular and the sacred in many dynamic ways. And to have you here kind of affirms what we represent or what we try to be for each other. So on behalf of all of us, I have a small gift. Thank you. There is cake and coffee, tea in the hall So please join us.